GM, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Frax Check. This is your host, capital K, and I will be taking you straight to the source of truth via checking the chain. But first, before we do that, please make sure you smash that like, retweet, and subscribe button. And also, quick PSA, I have been out for personal reasons and good personal reasons, but I am glad to be back and I'm glad to be delivering you some really good news because this week for Frax Check, I am calling it, Look Ma, we made it. And you will see very soon as to why that is. And marks a whole new evolution and a whole new chapter of Frax Finance. Moving on, first, we always start with the flagship product, or potentially used to be the flagship product, the Frax Stablecoin. Here we have a supply of 650 million, which have been pretty much flat for the last 4 months since like the beginning of December. Now, as with any stablecoin, you gotta check the peg. You see here for the last week, we traded as low as 0.994 and as high as 0.998 per the dashboards. But you obviously cannot always trust dashboards. So we got to go to the market and smash that 1 inch. Here, you see that swapping 35 million Frax to USDC gets you 0.995. All right. And I've also included a Frax BP pool balance here in the Frax BP curve LP pool to show you that the imbalance of Frax at 80%, 81%, and USDC at 19%. Though there are other sources for Frax USDC, such as from Uniswap, for example. That's how you're still able to get a 0.995 exchange rate. Now, just because this number 35 million is much smaller than what I used to use, which is like in the hundreds, in the 80s and the 60s, is because now you have two options. You have USDC and PYUSD. Well, with more option diversity, unfortunately, the liquidity kind of fragments a bit, depending on kind of where you want to get to. So here is the market swap rate for the flagship stablecoin. Moving on, we have the balance sheet. Here, this balance sheet, we have a change of 1.4% on the asset side, increasing by 11 million. And remember the formula before I go further. The formula is assets equals liabilities plus equity always and forever. So if the asset increased by 11.4 million and the liabilities decreased by 1 million, then that means our equity balance must have increased by 12.4 million, which is exactly what happened here, which represents an 11% bump, which leads me to tell you the reason why I called this Frax Check, Look Ma, we made it, is because our collateral ratio is a 99.3%. Yeah. This is frankly as close as one can get to for a 100% collateral ratio. And for the folks who wants to follow along at home, you simply take the total assets minus the lock liquidity, which you get treasury assets, as I coined the term, and then you divide that by the Frax supply, which is also provided in the balance sheet, gives you the collateral ratio here, 99.3%. Phenomenal news. I know this is not quote unquote the latest news, but I wanted to include this in the Frax Check so that we have a archival record of this being covered on Frax Check, because we have been on a long march here from the low 90s all the way back up to this number ever since we started Frax Check. So a pretty big monumental moment. All right, moving on, we got to take a look at the liquidity. Here, frankly, it's a little bit sad per se, because I remember at one point in time we had so much Frax liquidity on curve, but here nowadays there is 55 million in the Frax base pool, 128 million in the PYUSD liquidity pools, and then 8 million in Frax 3 CRV. And if you add all of that together, it comes out to be about 191 million, 192 million. So pretty much right on par with 190 million TVL of the 3 pool. So we are basically 1-to-1 with the 3 pool. This ratio used to be 3 to 1. That meant that all Frax related liquidity was 3x that of 3 pool. So that's why I said I was kind of a little sad, because we have fallen a lot in terms of liquidity. But no matter, we're here. There's a new chapter. Let's get it back. All right. Moving on to our sFRAX product. Here, you could take the Frax and earn basically treasury yields at 5.4%. And we see here there's 28.2 million in TVL for sFRAX supply. And there is about 194 holders of the sFRAX token. So these people are earning a nice 5.4% stable yield. This hasn't changed ever since we've been covering sFRAX. So solid there. Now, if sFRAX is not your cup of tea, you could switch it up with another product called the Frax Bonds, which is FXBs. These are effectively, think of them as zero coupon bonds, where at maturity, you get the full face value of the bond back. Now, the total auction of these bonds right now on the Frax dashboard is about 6 million across 3 tranches of 2 million each with different expiries. So the first expiry is on July. Actually is June 30th. And then the other one is December 31st. So there's always these 2 windows of expiries. And obviously it goes down to many years. As you can see here, this current bond goes to the year 2024. So June 30th, 2024 and December 31st, 2024. You can participate here. The yield to maturity, as you can see here, ranges between 4.5% all the way up to 6%. So fairly, not bad, but obviously there are much better places for you to actually get yield rather than going this, rather than participating in this specific market. Hence, the TVL dropped drastically by 22% down to 9.7 million. I think we were at about 12 million or so the last time we did this. So, market moves. That's all I got to say here. All right, moving on. We can't always have nice things. So here's the first, I guess, some salt to go with all that sweetness, some bitterness to go with all that sweetness. We have the FraxETH, the crowd favorite product, or should I say maybe used to be the crowd favorite product, because now it has dropped 8% below that 300,000 threshold mark, which I do not like to see. And I'll explain why it's more concerning now to me than ever. But first, let's cover where these Frax ETH are hanging out. So even though we've decreased by 8%, from all of these Frax ETH, about 71% of them is hanging out in the sFRAX ETH staking contract, earning that sweet native yield. And about 15% is chilling in the curve pool. So Frax ETH, Frax ETH WETH, Frax ETH STETH, right? Earning that CRV, CVX, and FXS rewards. Lastly, here's what I want to highlight is 15% of the Frax ETH supply is just chilling in the ether, meaning they're not being used, they're not being staked, they're not being provided liquidity. They are adopted elsewhere in the ecosystem at large. So in the wild, I think this is an all-time high number. I haven't seen it hit 15% yet. So this is definitely a very interesting development. And it's good to see that people are actually adopting it outside of just Frax. Moving on, we got to take a look at the peg, right? Because remember, this ETH is still a stable coin. It's just peg. Frax ETH is still a stable coin, just peg to ETH. Here, we swapped 3,500 Frax ETH and received an exchange rate of 0.991. So that factors out about 12.5 million that you can come in and smash the liquidity pool with. And unfortunately, because of our drop in TVL and our drop in supply, there's obviously a drop in the TVL here. And we see a decrease of about 14%. We are at about 118 million in TVL. That is across all of the 3 pools. So we have about 41,000 Frax ETH being paired against about 11,000 ETH, WETH, and STETH. That's what you get for the liquidity. And remember earlier about why I said this decrease in TVL or this decrease in supply was concerning to me? Is that's because we are just shedding market share, right? We've just pretty much been red on the 30-day change ever since the year began, right? We used to be in 5th place, But actually, let me take that way back. We used to be in third place. Then Binance Staked ETH came out. But that was expected. It's Nance. They're going to smoke us. They're going to smoke everybody. So that's fine. Fourth place is a good place. Then Manto came in. Then Stakestone came in. And now, frankly, there's another contender, Swell, who is very, very close behind us. And if they were to increase by another 25%, which probably take them a 30-day or so, we're now going to drop down to seventh, right? This is quite alarming. Now, however, one saving grace is we are still the top in yield. And the reason why I say still the top is because with Manto's meth, they are subsidizing. Basically, a Manto's treasury of massive ETH is subsidizing all of their meth native yields so that the people are getting a top up on all of their TVL. And that leads to APY of 8% for meth versus Frax ETH is 4%. So in terms of purely native yield, Frax ETH is still ahead. And with that though, Frax ETH still has a TVL of about $1 billion. So that's still fairly good. At least we're still in the 10-figure mark. But on the other hand, on the other graph, you see here, this is a chart of what your performance would have been if you had staked with FraxETH, sFRAX instead of rETH or sTETH. From the beginning of time, which is November 22nd, you would have earned 40% more than rETH and 24% more than sTETH if you had just threw it into sFRAX instead. Okay, these are not cherry picked. This is a time series from literally since inception. So there's no cherry picking here. It is what it is. Now, the third stablecoin product, the FPI. See here we have a supply cap of 84.6 million. Annual inflation rate is 3.2%. And the treasury TVL is 93.7 million. I will probably be sunsetting this portion, but just wanted to give it one last capture. And right now, the equity is 4.7 million, by the way. All right, now moving on to one of my favorite parts of the whole Frax ecosystem, which is Frax Lend. Now, this bad boy has just been climbing up the charts. TVL is at almost $400 million. That, I believe, is definitely an all-time high. And out of that, 90 million is being borrowed with a healthy utilization rate of 77%. Love to see that. I freaking love to see that. And now here, moving on to the final leg of the DeFi Trinity, the FraxSwap, which has a TVL of 72 million, increase of 1.7% from February. And so far for the month of March, it has processed 127 million TVL. So it almost had a, almost a 1.5% turnover in how much volume it has facilitated with its existing TVL. Now, moving on to my favorite section, the profitability. This is the show me the money. And here I'm going to kick it right off with the most biggest banging buck. That is the AMO of Frax Lend, where we actually increased it by 5.5 million since February. And our March guesstimated revenue should come out to be about almost $900,000. How is that even possible? Well, that's possible because Frax Lend is able to generate almost $224,000 a week on average for the last 3 weeks or so. So factor that in, extrapolate it for one more month, it gets me about 900K. That is crazy. Previously, at the beginning of the year, our Frax Lend revenue was only 62K a week, and I thought that was crazy. Here, we pretty much 4X'd, and I'm just at awe that this is working out. I wouldn't say as planned, but pretty much as planned. When the bull market comes, people like to leverage, and with that leverage, we saw APY still sustained at almost 30%, 25 to 30% across the board. Look at your CRV pairs, your WETH pairs, your FXS pairs. Like, people are just longing this thing. And as part of leverage, there's always the other L, and that is liquidation. And in March, we were able to generate $93,000 in liquidation fees across about 17 positions. Very unfortunate because some of these positions were quite large. Like for example, with one of the biggest position was liquidated for the CVX Frax pair at about 482,000, netting the protocol about $36,000 in Frax revenue or profit, rather, just pure profit, because Frax operates its own liquidation engine. So that, folks, right there, mixed with that 900K Frax Lend, pretty much generated about $1 million in March for Frax. Unbelievable. Now, moving on, we have the FPI monthly revenue, which I'll probably also be sunsetting after this episode. It's about $17,000 for March so far. And remember earlier, FPI is actually above the peg by like 44 bips. So it's, all of this is going to be rolled into the treasury. Very nice. Lastly, we have the Frax ETH revenue. Here, largely unchanged since the last time, except for the price of ETH going up. Here, we see that on a per day, Frax ETH generates about 20.3 ETH. So you multiply that by 365, you get 7,410. Multiply that by the 8% fee share, gives you 593 ETH. Divide that by 12 months, leaving you with 49.4 ETH. And when you turn that into you dollarize that, it gets $180,000. And when you annualize 180, it gives you about $2.2 million in annual run rate for the Frax ETH product. So that is it for this Frax check. And I just want to wish you guys a very, very wonderful end to Q1 2024. How the time flies. And if you want to make sure you stay up to date with everything Frax related, smash that subscribe, like, and retweet button. And you can follow me on Twitter at 0x_K. I will catch you guys next time. See you on chain. Peace.